All right, we're back in session. The jurors are not present. The defendant and counsel are present. Folks, we've had a pretty rigorous week, and we've about worn this jury out, I suspect. They're probably pretty tired, but I'm going to go to at 5 o'clock or so, but we'll probably cut it off about 5 and wherever we are at that point. Ask jury to come in, please. Any additional witnesses you anticipate?
Two.
You think you'll rest sometime Monday?
I do.
Okay, thank you. In view of that, you'll need to be ready on Monday.
We'll be ready.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're back in session. The jurors are again present. State may call your next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. This time the state will call Dr. Ann Ross.
Okay. Doctor, you come forward. Be sworn, please. If you would take your oath, please.
Swear to the testimony you give this court will be the truth and the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Would you state your name, please?
My name is Ann Ross.
And how are you employed?
I'm employed as a professor at North Carolina State University.
And what subject do you teach at North Carolina State University?
I teach forensic anthropology.
And can you explain to the jury what forensic anthropology is?
Yes, a forensic anthropologist is a person who is an expert in hard tissues or the skeleton. And we assess things like skeletal biology to issues of the law. So we look at the medical legal aspects of issues relating to the human skeleton.
Can you describe, if you would, your educational background?
Yes, I have a PhD in anthropology from the University of Tennessee. I did a 3-year postdoctoral associate at the University of Florida at the C.A. Pound Human Identification Laboratory. I'm also board certified in forensic anthropology.
And you've indicated in describing forensic anthropology and the medical legal terminology, have you had an opportunity to be part of cases and be asked to render opinions regarding various issues related to anthropology?
Yes, absolutely.
And can you give the jury some examples of the kind of cases that you've been involved with involving forensic anthropology?
Yes, our laboratory currently works on consultations for cases for the Chief Medical Examiner's Office here in Raleigh and also for the Winston-Salem office. We consult on a regular basis with issues relating anywhere from developing a biological profile of an unknown set of remains. So for example, when you have a skeleton and you don't know who this person is, we would render a biological profile as to how old that person was when they died, how tall they were, if they were male or female, what ancestral background, and we will provide all types of information that will hopefully lead ultimately to an identification. We also, one of our specialty areas is to conduct a consultation on trauma. So when you have trauma to soft tissues, that is the purview of the medical examiner. But once you don't have those soft tissues, or if you still have those soft tissues, we will also render an opinion to the type and class of instrument or implement that was used to make that trauma or those defects.
And if you had that opportunity, that is to work with medical examiners or medical examiners' offices to assist with regard to the performing of an autopsy and providing information with regard to trauma to the heart tissue or the bones.
Yes.
And have you had an opportunity to testify about those results?
Yes, I have.
At this time, the state would tender Dr. Ross to the court as an expert in forensic anthropology.
The court accepts the tender. Go ahead. Thank you.
Dr. Ross, you indicated that you had an opportunity or had opportunities in the past to work with the medical examiner. And is that here in Wake County or various locations?
Mostly in Wake County, but other locations as well.
And with regard to this case, did you receive a call from Dr. Radish to perform some evaluation and testing to assist her with regard to the remains of Laura Ackerson?
Yes, I did.
And specifically, what were you requested to do with regard to initially? What did Dr. Radish request of you?
My recollection is that Dr. Radish received the remains of Laura Ackerson in several containers. And the issue was trying to identify what we had received, and she asked me to assist in the initial inventory and examination of those remains.
And in terms of the remains that you received, can you describe what you received?
Yes. Let me take a look at my notes here. We received several, the remains were received in a cardboard box and included several plastic containers with the sectioned remains of Laura Ackerson in there, which went, do you want me to list all of them?
Well, let me ask you first, what do you mean about the sectioned remains?
I believe there was an autopsy that was performed in Texas, and they also made sections to some of the bones, and that's one of the issues that Dr. Radish wanted me to help her with, if we can differentiate what was done at dismemberment and what was done at autopsy.
And in terms of going about that process of being able to differentiate the cuts that were made at the autopsies as opposed to at dismemberment, can you describe for the jury kind of that process and how you were able to go about that?
One of the main things that we requested also were photographs at autopsy prior to anything having been done to Laura Ackerson. And so I was able to piece together what was originally found with what we had in those containers.
And when you say photographs, they would be photographs that were taken in Texas?
Yes.
Okay. And prior to that autopsy?
Correct.
And as a result of having that information, being the photographs as well as the remains that were provided to you, can you describe for the jury what it was that you actually received and were able to identify?
Yes. We received numerous rib fragments, a fragment of the left clavicle, right humeral head fragment, which is part of the humerus, the upper arm bone. We received proximal right and left femur, which is your longest bone in your leg, so the upper portion of those bones. We received several vertebrae. We received some of the neck vertebrae, cervical vertebra 1 through 4. We received the anterior portion of the right tibia, some several rib fragments, and the cranium, with the mandible as well that had a fracture, and there was a right glued canine to that. I'm assuming that was done in Texas as well. And we were able to establish a lot of these were received in plastic containers about 2.5 inches in diameter, and they had formalin, so they had been preserved in formalin.
Is that some kind of chemical that's...
Yes, it's a common chemical used to preserve human material.
And once you kind of went through and figured out what you had, did you undertake to try to determine, for instance, with the sections, which side had been actually cut by the medical examiner as opposed to the dismemberment?
Yes.
And with regard to these remains that you've listed, were certain bones or fragments easier to make that distinction?
Yes,
than
they
others?
were.
And what about, for instance, the rib fragments?
Yes.
Were they, was that an easier process with regard to rib fragments or not?
No, those actually, it was quite difficult to assess whether the ribs were done during dismemberment or at autopsy. And the reason is that the ribs are very small, and once you start cutting through those, they fracture very easily, and you cannot distinguish any type of cut mark or striations or any type of defect that was left by the tool that was used, so it makes it very difficult. And also with the ribs, normally when you do an autopsy as well, it's a common practice to take the plastron or the chest plate off of the body to examine internally.
And so with regard to the rib fragments that you received, were you able to distinguish what the cuts that were made at autopsy as opposed to cuts that were made as part of dismemberment?
I am looking at my report here. I know there were some that I was not able to distinguish, and I put, I believe I said not able to distinguish on the ones that I couldn't do.
And kind of conversely, were there other remains or bones that you received that you were, it was clear to you the area that had been cut with dismemberment as opposed to the cut that had been made by the medical examiner?
Yes.
And can you describe which bones that was apparent to you?
The bones that were very apparent are some of the bigger bones. So there were I believe one of the femora showed clear saw mark activity that we were able to distinguish. And also there was a stab wound to the 4th cervical vertebra, which is the 4th neck vertebra on the anterior surface.
And so with regard first to the larger bones where you were able to make a clear distinction, can you describe the difference between what you observed with regard to where the medical examiner had made the cut as opposed to the dismemberment site?
Yes. The medical examiner would normally use what they call a striker saw, a bone saw. And that leaves a very smooth edge without striations. And the bones that we were able to observe on Laura Atkinson had distinguishing striation left by a different type of blade.
And when you use the term striations, what are you referring to?
I am referring to the lines or grooves that are left behind by a particular saw.
And are you familiar with the term tool mark analysis?
Yes.
And with regard to your work as a forensic anthropologist, are you called upon to make some opinions, if you can, with regard to tool mark analysis?
Yes, and we don't generally call it, we're not tool mark analysts as you would normally think of as in law enforcement. But we are able to associate specific types of marks left on the bone to specific classes and types of weapons.
And as part of your evaluation in this case, you indicated that on certain of the larger bones that you observed striations. And did you undertake to try to make a determination as to what type of instrument or tool would have caused those striations at the dismemberment site?
Yes, we did.
And can you describe, if you would, that process, how you go about doing that?
How we went about doing that. We were provided with a skill saw by Detective Falk, because this is the type of saw that they thought may have contributed to the defects. So in order to test this, we used that saw that was given to us along with the different blades that came with that saw. And we utilized pig bones as a proxy. So we tested the different types of saws on the pig bones and examined those striations and compared them to what was evident on Laura Ackerson's remains.
And is that a normal way that you would go about if you had remains, as you did in this case, that had particular markings or striations? Would you try to replicate those markings with regard to, in this case, pig bones?
Yes.
Okay. And once you make the cuts with regard to the pig bones, do you then undertake to compare the two and draw any conclusions?
Yes, and then we make comparisons of both based on the overall morphology or what they look like. We look at the basic size and the differences between those grooves that are left by the saw marks, and then we make direct comparisons using a high-powered microscope to see if they're similar or not consistent.
And after going through that process, that is comparing the dismemberment sites to the pig bone using the saw that you were provided and the various blades and making those comparisons, did you draw some conclusions?
Yes, we did. We concluded that one of the saws that we compared to the defects on Laura Ackerson's remains was not consistent. However, there was one saw blade in particular that left consistent marks on Laura Ackerson's remains.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Sure.
Dr. Ross, I'm handing you what has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit A509 and A510.
Yes.
And with regard to State's Exhibit A509, can you describe what that is?
Yes, this is my initial report of trauma examination for the remains that arrived in the numerous containers from Raleigh Medical Examiner's office that had originally arrived to them from Texas.
And is that report exactly as you prepared it and submitted it following the conclusions that you drew with regard to the trauma examination?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the State will move to introduce into evidence State's Exhibit A509.
Let me receive.
And with regard to State's Exhibit A510, do you recognize that document?
I do.
And what is A510?
A510 is the comparison of the skill saw and its blades using pigs as proxies.
So is that kind of the second report that you prepared in connection with the evaluation that you conducted?
That's correct.
At this time, the State will move to introduce into evidence State's Exhibit A510.
Let me receive.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask permission to publish State's Exhibit A509
All right.
by virtue of the large screen.
Okay.
This is State's Exhibit, actually A509, that's up on the screen. And is this the kind of how you began your report here?
Yes, it is.
And this indicates basically that you received the remains on September the 1st of 2011, as well as the CD containing the Texas autopsy photographs. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then the next section, you identify the conditions of the remains as you received them. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what is this next section, which appears to be a table?
Yes, and for purposes, this is primarily an inventory of the remains that we received in the laboratory.
And basically, the first column would indicate identifying the remain itself.
Yes.
How it came to you.
Yes.
What are the next?
The next one is whether there was soft tissue. Some had soft tissue on them, and I would say soft tissue, yes. Some would have cartilage. I have also indicated where there is no soft tissue and it's just the bones. And I also have some that has desiccated soft tissue. Desiccated soft tissue meaning it's dried out. The next column, whether they were contained in formalin or whether they're not treated with formalin. And then the last column is differentiating between autopsy section and dismemberment, and with the assistance of assessing them from the original autopsy photographs from Texas. And for example, in the rib fragments, I say I cannot differentiate. So for C5 fragmentary and the cervical vertebrae, those are easy to differentiate, but the ones that I say no are that you can't differentiate them.
So basically, you have N's and Y's are not applicable in this last column. So no would be that you couldn't make a distinction between the area that was cut by the medical examiner as opposed to the dismemberment site.
That is correct.
And so listed here, L2 is the first one that's listed in the table where you've indicated a Y for yes.
Yes.
And L2, where is that located?
L2 is one of your lower lumbar vertebrae. Okay, we have cervical vertebra, which are your neck vertebra, your thoracic vertebra that articulate with your ribs, and then you have 5 lower lumbar vertebrae.
And so was this, as opposed to the rib fragments that you had observed, basically a bigger
Yes,
bone?
a bigger, denser bone.
And that, as a consequence, was easier to make some distinction between those sites and the cutting?
Yes.
What were the other remains that you were able to make that distinction between the dismemberment site as opposed to where the medical examiner had made it?
We were able to make that distinction on the right humeral head fragment, which is your upper arm bone, and that's also a larger, more dense bone. Cervical 5 vertebra, also your 5th neck vertebra. We were able to distinguish that in the right scapula or your shoulder bone, or excuse me, your left shoulder bone. Left proximal femur, right proximal femur, which are the longest bone in your leg, the proximal aspect, or towards the midline. Your right distal femoral condyles as well, which is where they articulate to your lower leg bones. First lumbar vertebra, 11th and 12th thoracic vertebra, cervical vertebra 1 through 4, and that was it.
So I count about 10 of the remains that you were able to make that differentiation.
Yes.
And going down to the next page, you've got a section entitled Trauma. And what are you reporting here in terms of your conclusions that you reached?
I am reporting here my observations of the trauma that is observed not from sectioning at autopsy, but those that were produced outside of autopsy.
And with regard to your observations, did you make any observations with regard to saw marks?
I did.
And can you describe what you observed?
Yes, there was evidence on several of the bones of saw marks, and particularly I also estimated that a saw with 14 teeth per inch, and most saws have, they're based on the distance between the teeth that are used for a saw. And we were able to estimate that this one had approximately 14 teeth per inch. I believe the saw manufacturers also have these are standard sizes, and we're able to actually count those striations in the bone, and we are able to state how many teeth per inch each or the cuts are made. Yes.
And did you include as part of this report a photograph that would illustrate with regard to one of the bones where you saw these saw marks?
Yes, I did. Yes. And this is the left proximal femur.
And again, that's where?
This is the upper portion of your lower leg bone, and you can see there that almost looks like a big ball. That is your femoral head that articulates with your hip. That actually goes inside your hip.
And you have a notation which is, and a line drawn from it, which is 14 TPI?
Yes.
And is that the 14 teeth per inch?
That's the 14 teeth per inch.
And you also have a scale kind of off to the side in a photograph that appears to be the same bone but taken kind of from a different
angle, so you could actually see how we counted those teeth per inch.
So basically you have an inch marker there.
Yeah.
And then when you say counted, what are you counting exactly?
We're counting those striations or those grooves left by the saw, and we count how many of those striations you can actually see in an inch, basically.
And I believe there's do you see a pointer, a laser pointer?
Yes, I do.
Can you point out the striations that you observed that you were counting?
Yes. Let's see, I don't want to, you see these right here where we have them marked? And those are, the best place to visibly observe those are on cortical bone. Cortical bone is the compact bone. What you see here, this is a lot of spongy bone. So those don't really leave good marks that we can actually count. But there was enough cortical bone right in here where you can actually see some of the striations that I'm pointing to, which we have marked.
And just when you say the cortical bone is better because it's not that spongy bone, is it just
Yes.
the hardness of that surface?
It's the hardness and the smoothness of the surface, whereas the spongy bone has a lot of honeycomb. It has like a honeycomb structure, and it's difficult to observe patterns.
And so you had observed with regard, this is an example, but in several of the different bones, what appeared to be these striations, and you identified those as dismemberment sites.
That is correct.
And with regard to your analysis and evaluation, were you able to make any opinions or draw any conclusions with regard to how soon after death this dismemberment took place?
In my opinion, and generally, dismemberments occur post-mortem or after death. But to a forensic anthropologist, the peri-mortem period can also include post-mortem. So we're talking at or around that time, but we can't really say for sure because the way we actually assess those is to see whether there's any healing to the bone, and there is no healing to these bones.
And you've used the term post-mortem and peri-mortem. Can you define those terms?
Yes. Peri-mortem, again, means at or around the time of death, which is a much shorter period for a forensic pathologist. For a forensic anthropologist, the peri-mortem period also means at or around the time of death, but we can't really assess that with with as much accuracy as a forensic pathologist does when they have all tissue present. The way we look at it is whether the bone was wet or green, or whether the bone was dry when you actually made cuts or made marks on the bone. And we can assess that these were not done in dry bone, these were done in wet bone.
It's 5 o'clock. I think would probably be a good time to stop for the day. We'll finish Dr. Ross's testimony Monday morning. We're also going to call Ms. Lask back, as you recall, and finish her testimony on Monday. And I believe from what I gathered from what the prosecutor had said earlier, Dr. Ross, Ms. Lask, and then you have one additional witness. Yes, sir. So you anticipate the state will rest on Monday? I do. Okay. All right. Doctor, stay with us just for a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to stop for the week. It appears that we're ahead of schedule, as I had hoped, and we're making progress in this matter. I remind you, you're going home over the weekend. Again, to follow my previous instructions, be careful about your conduct. Be careful not to be in or around anyone who just who wants to talk about this case. Politely and firmly tell all your friends and loved ones and neighbors that you can talk to them about it after it's over with, but not until. Okay. Don't be exposed to any information about the case, and keep an open mind. Don't form or express any opinion about the guilt or innocence of the defendant or any matter in controversy. We'll see everybody here at 9:30 on Monday morning. Thank you very much. All excused. Thank you, Doctor. You can stand down. Thank you. Anything further today, folks? Okay. All right, Sheriff, we're going to be in recess till 9:30 Monday morning. Thank you.